Hey vinyl community, I wanted to do a quick video, and these are cheap albums that to me are priceless. And by cheap, I mean you can probably find them in dollar bins, or at the very least they're, no more than 10 bucks on eBay or in a record store or whatever. They're not expensive albums, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but I would never ever get rid of them from my record collection, no matter how much you offered me, just because I have some sort of attachment to these records. First one is a K-Tel record. This is Full Tilt, and this came out probably around, I would say, 1981 maybe. It's got Ambrosia on it. It has Blondie. It's got the Pointer Sisters, Al Stewart, Genesis, Misunderstanding is on here. The Blondie song is The Tide is High, Let My Love Open the Door from Pete Townsend, Whip It, Devo. So I got this for Christmas. It was probably 1981. And I have such memories of playing this because I didn't have a lot of vinyl back in the day. I just didn't get vinyl. I couldn't buy it myself. Any records that I got were albums that somebody didn't want in their collection and just handed off to me. I wasn't even allowed to play my dad's collection on my crappy little turntable. So this was one of the early ones, and I remember I got this in Christmas of 1981, and I believe it was right around the time when, I don't know, I have memories of it being around the time The Empire Strikes Back, the Star Wars movie came out, but I just remember playing this record to death and just enjoying the heck out of it. I don't know. I can't explain it because none of these songs are like, oh, wow, this song is awesome. I mean, maybe the Devo Whip It song, but some of these are just downright cheesy. It does have Ain't That a Shame by Cheap Trick, so there's some decent stuff on here, but Take Your Time, Do It Right, Part 1 by the SOS Band, Hot Rod Hearts by Robbie Dupree, He's So Shy by the Pointer Sisters. So it's just a collection of all different stuff, but these are songs that I grew up with just playing over and over on my turntable because it was one of the few albums that I had back in that day. The second one is, it's a Superstar Collection, another K-Tel record, and this one had, this was another one. I got this probably like 79, or I think it was 1979. I was 9 years old at the time, and I remember that Christmas getting it, and I was playing with my Death Star. I had the Star Wars action figures and the Death Star. I had a land speeder and just some of the different figures that I had, and so I have such an association when I hear some of these songs and playing, with the stuff that I got for Christmas. I got the Death Star that year, and some other stuff, but this has got Imaginary Lover, Atlanta Rhythm Section, Love is Thicker Than Water, Andy Gibb, Stephen Bishop, On and On, Alice Cooper, You and Me, the Star Wars title theme by Miko, and it also has a theme from Close Encounters by Miko, Moonlight Feels Right by Starbuck. So just some, cheesy stuff that I don't listen to really anymore, but I do occasionally throw this on just for a chuckle because I loved this album growing up. It was one of the few, like I said, that I had in my collection, so I just spun this endlessly. And it's a wonder I'm not a huge, yacht rock fan or whatever now. I mean, some stuff I like, but this was a steady diet of cheesy disco and kind of, light pop rock back in the day. Speaking of Star Wars, this is the vinyl version, but I had this on cassette. I got this, I think it was probably 78. It was after the Star Wars movie came out. I was a huge fan. And back then, we didn't have VCRs. There wasn't any way to see the movie unless they re-released it in theaters. So the only way you could kind of relive that movie or re-experience it was for me, on vinyl anyway. And it's so funny because the actor who narrates it, it's basically the story of Star Wars, and it's narrated. There's some dialogue and sound effects from the movie on here, but the actor does it in such a Shakespearean voice. It's like he's reading Hamlet or something, and it's just so amusing. But at the time, it was so intense, and he really, recreated the story as best as he could on this record. So I found this in a dollar bin, and I just love it. I throw it on for my kids every so often just to, have a laugh. But it brings back such memories for me. And the next two, this is two records actually. These were the very first Beatle albums that I ever owned, ever. And my dad didn't like the Beatles. I mean, he didn't hate the Beatles, but he didn't have any Beatles in his collection. My mom didn't have any Beatle records. Some of my relatives did, but I didn't have access to the records to be able to play it. So from the age of 9 or 10, I was huge into the Beatles. And I had a tape recorder, and the only way I could get their music was to wait on the radio, listen to the radio, wait for a Beatles song to come on, push my tape recorder up to the speaker, press record, and wait till the song was over, and then sit there and wait for the next time a Beatles song would come on, and hopefully it'd be a different Beatles song. So when I got these, it was incredible. And I know I got them because they were so cheap. These were capital budget reissues of the Rock and Roll Music compilations. They separated them out. This is volume 1, and this pretty much has stuff from 1964, 1963 to 1965 or 6, and then this is 1966, some 1965 stuff through 1969. But I played these to death because finally I didn't have to sit and listen to the Beatles on my crappy little tape recorder, and I could just play these songs over and over. And it's a pretty decent cross-section of music. One thing I remember is I couldn't differentiate who was singing. Like, I didn't know it was John singing Twist and Shout, but it was Paul singing I Saw Her Standing There, but it was Ringo singing I Want to Be Your Man, and George singing Roll Over Beethoven. They all, with my young ears, they all kind of sounded the same. It was only later that I learned to differentiate the singer, but I just stared at this album cover and listened to all the great music on here. It has Birthday on here, which was one of my favorite tracks. Back in the USSR, Helter Skelter, Taxman, Revolution, I'm Down. So many great songs on here, and it's not a greatest hits collection. There's some, rare, I want to say rare tracks, but just some deep album tracks on here that you wouldn't necessarily always hear on the radio, and weren't necessarily greatest hits material, but I just love those albums. This next one, this is the actual vinyl copy, one of the few actual copies of albums that my dad owned, and I remember him coming home and playing this a lot over and over and over again. So you got Jim Messina, who used to be in Buffalo Springfield, and then this dopey looking guy with a shag haircut is Kenny Loggins before he got a haircut, groomed himself, and started putting out timeless soundtrack hits and, ballads and whatnot. But this has Angry Eyes on it, Vahivala, Danny's song, Your Mama Don't Dance. But I just have a clear recollection of, and back in my house in the day growing up, my dad would put an album on, and we didn't live in a big house. We lived in a relatively small house, and so the record player was in the living room, and it was, you had the living room and then a tiny kitchen and then our bedroom. So no matter where we were in the house, when my dad put the record on and he cranked it up, you could hear it no matter where you were in the house, especially the kitchen, in our bedrooms, that sound would just come filtering through. And so this album, you couldn't get away from. And I like it. There's tracks on here that I like, but it's still just such a nostalgic feeling that I get when I listen to that. And this was one of the first Elton John albums that I ever had. I got this for Christmas. My dad had it, but again, you know, he wouldn't let me play it on my turntable, so I had to get my own copy, and I was so excited when I did because there's so much to look at in here. It's got a really extensive booklet with the lyrics and photographs and a collage and all sorts of really cool stuff. And I remember just, you know, sitting in my bedroom, and it was, you know, listening to music for me back then was an active experience. It wasn't just something that you put on and you went about your business. I mean, you sat down, or I did anyway, I sat down with a record and I would just study not only the album artwork, but the lyrics, and just that music, the songs were so connected to the album artwork and the lyric pages, whatever extras came with an album. And that is so, you know, I can't separate the songs on this album from the album packaging. It is so firmly ingrained in my consciousness when I listen to this. But it's a great album, and you know, it's not an expensive Elton John. You can probably find it at any record store, really, but to me, I think the world of it. Next one is REO Speedwagon. This is High Infidelity. Now, when I was growing up, my mom and dad used to have parties in our basement, and my dad had a tricked out stereo system, and we had a bar downstairs, and, you know, all the adults would come by and they'd all go downstairs, and my dad, somehow he had wired it up so the turntable and his receiver were upstairs, but he had the speakers wired down through the basement. And so he would put an album on upstairs, and then the party would be going on down in the basement. And one of the albums that I remember in the late 70s, probably 79, 1980, that would always get played at a party was REO Speedwagon's High Infidelity. I remember, you know, all the coats being on the bed in, you know, one of the bedrooms, and just, you know, I could hear, because it was a small house, I could hear all that music. I was supposed to be in bed, but I could still hear all the music from the basement coming up through the floor, and hearing this over and over, you know, Don't Let 'Em Go, Take It on the Run, Keep on Loving You, you know. So this was a big album back in the day, and I have vivid memories of those parties and hearing this album when I was supposed to be sleeping. Last album that I'm going to show, this is the first Beach Boys album that I ever, not that I owned, because I didn't own it till later, but one of my uncles had it, and this was one of my first exposures to the Beach Boys, was hearing this album. And so some of these songs, you know, I Get Around, Don't Worry Baby, Help Me Rhonda, California Girls, I heard for the first time on this album. And I remember being, because they were my uncles were a bit younger than my mom, and so I remember being in their bedroom at my grandparents' house and listening to these great tracks, and just loved the hell out of the Beach Boys, and that's continued to this day. But this was, you know, again, I remember staring at this picture and all the, you know, the liner notes and whatnot on here, and this was my first real exposure to the great music of the Beach Boys. So anyway, this video ran a little longer than I intended, but anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'd love to know, you know, do you have any cheap records that you would never part with, no matter how much money somebody offered you? And of course, nobody's going to offer me money for these records anyway, but anyway, take care, and thanks for watching.